Welcome to English Grammar, a two-part lesson on the clause. In this class, we're going to discuss two things: independent clauses and subordinate clauses. What is a clause, you might ask? Well, a clause is a group of words containing a subject and a predicate and is used as part of a sentence. If you recall previous lessons of English grammar with me, we have talked a considerable amount about subject and predicate and identifying them. The subject being that which the sentence is all about, and then the predicate, everything that follows that talks about the subject. A clause is simply a statement that has a subject and a predicate and is used as part of a sentence. Clauses are classified according to grammatical completeness, meaning they aren't just a bunch of words thrown on a page or in a novel or in a poem or in any form of literature, but they are actually words that are used, that are grouped together and classified according to grammatical completeness, meaning they have to have a thought and a pattern and a purpose when they are placed together, so that they create something that, one, relays the meaning from the author who is writing things down, and then also as the person who is reading then takes those words and digests them and ingests them and then computes with its mind and with the heart and with all the emotions and all the different senses. So those that can stand alone if removed from their sentences are called independent clauses, meaning they can be a clause that doesn't have to have a string of other statements. It simply can be pulled from the sentence, and therefore it's called an independent clause. And those that do not express a complete thought and cannot stand alone are called subordinate clauses. When removed from its sentence, an independent clause makes complete sense. Okay, so the independent clause is not just a statement that stands alone, but it's also a clause, a group of words that makes complete sense on its own. It needs no other additional words in order to understand what it's saying. A clause is written with, an independent clause is written with a capital at the beginning and a period at the end. It becomes a simple sentence. It is referred to as an independent clause only when combined with one or more additional clauses, independent or subordinate, into a larger sentence. When two or more independent clauses are joined into a single sentence, the usual connecting words are and, but, or, nor, for, or for. Sorry. So and, but, or, nor, or for. Those are the connecting words that you will find that connect independent clauses into a single sentence. So let's look at a few examples. It was a hot, sunny weekend, and there's a connecting word, and all the beaches were packed. The conjunction and joins two independent clauses. How do we know that they're independent clauses? Well, for one, here, change that comma right there to a period. Change it to a period. All right, and change this A to a capital. All right, it was a hot, sunny weekend, period. You don't have to have and there. You could simply put a period at the end of that statement, and it is definitely an independent clause because it actually makes sense. It was a hot, sunny weekend. Also, look at the second part. This second part right here, all the beaches were packed. Well, somebody reading that statement would also understand that all the beaches were packed. That makes perfectly good sense. It doesn't need the conjunction at all. But, however, using the word and in this particular case right here also then begins, it connects this clause and this clause and puts them together and makes them one clause. So it was a hot, sunny weekend and all the beaches were packed. Let's look at the second example. The soup was delicious, but the main course tasted bland. Well, again, you have two different clauses. You have an independent clause here. The soup was delicious. That makes perfectly good sense. All you had to do is add a period. And look at this one. And take out that lowercase t and put a capital. And all you have to do is the main course tasted bland. Well, that also makes sense. You see, independent clauses, when they are pulled apart and taken out of sentences, they need to make sense. They have to sound correct. They have to actually say something complete. Like the soup was delicious, the main course tasted bland. Both of those statements, apart from each other, make perfect sense to the hearer, or to the reader, or to the writer. Here's the trick, though. Look for the conjunction. The independent clauses are joined by the word but. The soup was delicious, but the main course tasted bland. Subordinate clauses, which cannot stand alone as sentences, are used as nouns or modifiers in the same way as single words and phrases are. So, where we had independent clauses that had the ability to stand by themselves and could be pulled out of sentences because they could make sense, like the weekend was hot and sunny, or all the beaches were packed. Those kinds of things are taken out of the sentence and they can stand alone. But subordinate clauses are completely opposite. They cannot stand alone as sentences on their own. They are used, however, as nouns and modifiers in the same way as single words and phrases are. There are 5 functions of subordinate clauses. In today's part 1, we're going to discuss the adjective clause and the relative pronoun. On part 2, we will discuss the following 3 clauses: the noun clause, the adverb clause, and the subordinating conjunction. A subordinate clause is always, and I cannot stress that enough, always combined in some way with an independent clause. Because the weakness of a subordinate clause cannot stand on its own, it must have the strength of an independent clause, which is a complete thought, a complete statement, a complete written clause that can stand on its own. But a subordinate clause adds further information and further detail for an independent clause. So, whereas a subordinate clause, an independent clause can stand alone, a subordinate clause needs the strength of an independent clause. So independent clauses stand alone. But unfortunately, subordinate clauses are needy. They are needy. They absolutely need the independent clause. They are tied together. So subordinate clauses are always needy, and that's the way to remember them. Independent clauses, they're loners. They can do their own thing. But a subordinate clause absolutely needs the independent clause. Let's look at some examples of a subordinate clause. And here's an example of 3 clauses. Now, you'll notice that these are not sentences. They do not have periods at the end. They're not. They're not sentences, but they are clauses. They're a group of words that have an incomplete meaning. Whoever knows the song? Which is my favorite song? As she has always insisted. You hear how incomplete those 3 statements are? Those 3 clauses really are. Whoever knows the song? Well, when I hear that alone, forget everything else, but when I hear that alone, I just want to go, what? And put a big question mark. Whoever knows the song? What? What song? And who is whoever? Who? Whoever. And what song? I mean, they have no support. They are weak statements. Which is my favorite song? Mind you, that is not saying that. That is my favorite song. That would totally change it. That would change it to a independent clause, but without it, you are looking at which is my favorite song. And by the way, that doesn't have a question mark. No, it is a subordinate clause, as she has always insisted. But let's see how when we combine these 3 clauses, these 3 subordinate clauses to an independent clause, how they are strengthened, how they add further meaning, and they uncover the richness of our language, the English grammar way. So let's look. Combined with an independent clause, so here's the big one, you have to put it together. Each of these subordinate clauses plays a part in a sentence. All right, let's look at this again. These 3 statements now have been added to independent clauses. By changing just a few words, now you can see how this works. Whoever knows the song was the original subordinate clause. Okay? This was the subordinate clause. I'm gonna abbreviate it, and I'm gonna abbreviate this. I'm gonna mark them real quick. All right? Subordinate clause. And right here. Now, what you're going to notice is that none of these subordinate clauses are assigned to one specific place in a sentence. They can be used at the beginning, they can be used at the end, but they always have to be combined with something else. So whoever knows the song, remember that? Well, by adding an independent clause may join in, this is the independent clause, it now has a complete sentence. So whoever knows the song may join in. Well, wow, that makes so much more sense. So you're at a party and you're singing karaoke, and the guy holding the mic is up there and he sounds horrible, but he goes, whoever knows the song may join in. And everybody starts singing karaoke with him, singing the song. Well, doesn't that make more sense? Whoever knows the song may join in. Of course it does, because the way we hear it invites us in. It finishes the thought. It gives completeness. In the same way, we sang Green Grow the Lilacs, which is my favorite song. Actually, I've never heard Green Grows the Lilacs, but this was an example that I was using. Which is my favorite song doesn't give us any kind of detail, any at all. But what you'll notice is right there, there's a period right underneath that green mark. There's a period right here. This was the original subordinate clause. But look at this. If you simply End of the sentence right there. We sang green grow the lilacs. Period. Boom. And put a period right there. Don't you see how that itself could be an independent clause? Because you don't need any further explanation. We sang green grows the lilacs makes perfectly good sense. However, when you add it, when you combine it to the subordinate clause, and you take this independent clause and you put it with the subordinate clause, then they're combined, and there is the strength in this sentence. We sang green grows the lilacs, which is my favorite song. Also, the third example that I gave you earlier was as she has always insisted. Well, that in itself makes no sense at all. However, if you add it to the independent clause that you see right here, mother will not sing at parties, can stand alone. It's a loner. But poor subordinate clauses, they're just needy. They are really, really needy. They don't make sense on their own, so they have to be put with something else. They have to be put with an independent clause. So as she has always insisted, mother will not sing at parties. Now, boom, that whole clause, that whole two clauses makes perfectly good sense. These two things bring the whole thing together. The whole thing together. The adjective clause, like a phrase, a subordinate clause acts as a single part of speech, as an adjective, an adverb, or a noun. So this is one of those clauses that has several different parts of things that it can do. It's a phrase, obviously, and it's a subordinate phrase, so meaning that it's needy. It has to be attached to a independent clause. It has to. Otherwise, it doesn't work. A subordinate clause makes no sense on its own. But it can act as a single part of speech, as an adjective, an adverb, or a noun. 3 different parts of speech acted out in this phrase. An adjective clause is a subordinate clause that, like an adjective, modifies a noun or pronoun. Isn't that fascinating? Because that's exactly what an adjective does. An adjective modifies a noun or a pronoun. Well, this particular clause, an adjective clause, is a subordinate clause that modifies a noun or pronoun. Let's look at a couple of examples. So, she is someone who has shown remarkable courage. She is someone who has shown remarkable courage. This book, which I read from my history report, is about Africa. So look at this, which I read from my history report, is talking about this book. Is someone who has shown remarkable courage. It's talking about she. Students whose work represents their second best are not real students. Oh, that's an ouch kind of statement. But listen, the subordinate clause, whose, right there, work represents, all this is together, whose work represents their second best, modifies the noun students. Either one. Either one. They are, this whole thing modifies both this student and this student. So, students whose work represents their second best are not real students. Well, so the noun students, both of them, by the way, those are the same. They're one and the same. Their subordinate clause, whose work represents their second best modifies the noun students. Adjective clauses often begin with the pronouns who, whom, whose, which, or that. These pronouns refer to or are related to a noun or a pronoun that has come before. A relative pronoun is a pronoun that begins a subordinate objective clause and is related to a noun or a pronoun already mentioned or understood. Okay, so really and truly, in the sentence as you're reading along, if you find a relative pronoun, it may be an abstract thought for that sentence, meaning that it has not been specifically mentioned in the sentence, but rather is understood that you are talking about a noun or a pronoun, okay, about certain. But it's usually going to be a mentioned word. The word to which the relative pronoun is related is its antecedent, meaning it's the word that everything is talking about right there. It's the total package. A relative pronoun does three things. First, it refers to a preceding, meaning it comes before, preceding, meaning before, seating, noun or pronoun. It connects its clause with the rest of the sentence. It performs a function within its own clause by serving as the subject, object, etc. of the subordinate clause. For example, it refers to a preceding noun or pronoun. The amplifier was one that we had seen before. A relative pronoun right there, that. This connects this part to this part. But it's always, that is always talking about the amplifier. Which amplifier was one? That one we had seen before. Let's listen to a weather forecaster whom we can trust. Who is whom referring to? The weather forecaster. That's who we can trust. It connects its clause with the rest of the sentence. That's the second thing that a relative pronoun does. Miss Lopez is a counselor who never betrays a confidence. The relative pronoun who joins the subordinate clause to the independent clause. So let's look at it. Miss Lopez is a counselor. You could simply put a period there. And that is a independent clause. Miss Lopez is a counselor. Independent clause. It's a loner. It's off doing its own thing. You could pull it right out and it would never even affect the sentence. Miss Lopez is a counselor, period. Who never betrays a confidence. Well, that tells us nothing about the person. If it's on its own, who never betrays a confidence is a subordinate clause because it's needy. It needs Miss Lopez as a counselor because otherwise you don't know who is or who never betrays a confidence. You've got to have this independent clause. You should find a source that is more up to date. The subordinate clause is joined to the independent clause by the relative pronoun that. So, you should find a source. Well, you could actually say that to somebody and go period, because you don't have to worry about anything else. That is a complete thought, period, right there. You should find a source. If you were to say that to anybody, in the right context, they would understand that you should find a source. That is more up to date. Doesn't make any sense. That is a subordinate clause. So right there, that's a subordinate clause, and this is an independent clause, and so you can see one stands alone and one is needy. They need each other, and that is why we have that. That ties them together. And the third function, it performs a function within its own clause by serving as the subject, object, etc. of the subordinate clause. So let's look at an example. The principal appointed George, who is a reliable student. Okay. So, who is a reliable subject? Who is a reliable student? Well, who is specifically speaking about George. But really, who is the subject of is a reliable student? It is the subject. A reliable student is who? Who is the subject of the verb is in the adjective clause? Who is a reliable student? It performs a function within its own clause by serving as the subject, object, etc. of the subordinate clause. Again, let's look at a second example. Show me the book that you read. That is the object of the verb read. Read here is the book that you read. You read. It performs a function within its own clause by serving as the subject, object, etc. of the subordinate clause. These are the assignments for which you are responsible. Which is the object of the preposition for? See, for right here, and which comes just before. So which is the object? An adjective clause may also begin with the relative adjective, who, whose, or with the relative adverb where or when. He is a coach whose record has been amazing. Whose, the possessive form of the relative pronoun who, functions as an adjective modifying record. So it's an adjective modifying record. Do you remember the restaurant where we ate? Where acts as an adverb modifying ate, the verb in the clause. The antecedent is restaurant, meaning what everything is all about is this restaurant. Where do we eat lunch? We ate at the restaurant. Where we ate lunch is talking about the restaurant. The noun clause is a subordinate clause used as a noun. Whoever wins the election will have many problems. The entire noun clause, whoever wins the election, is the subject of the verb will have. Whoever wins the election is the noun clause. But it is all part of will have. Many problems. This is the solution. Solution is a noun, yes it is, used as a predicate nominative after the linking verb is. This and solution are tied together. Is brings it together, and the is the definite article. Solution is the predicate nominative. It gives explanation to the word this. This is what we have been looking for. What have we been looking for? What we have been looking for is a noun clause used as predicate nominative. What is this? Well, this is what we have been looking for. It explains this. It is the predicate nominative. It is a noun clause that is a predicate nominative that tells us what this is. We learned an interesting fact. Fact is a noun used as an object of the verb learned. What did we learn? We learned a fact. Fact is the object, is a noun used as the object of the verb learned. We learned that she is a physicist. That she is a physicist is a noun clause used as the object of the verb. By the way, the verb is learned. She is a physicist. That she is a physicist is the noun clause. Here is a draft of my proposal. Proposal is a noun used as the object of the preposition of. Here is a draft of what I am proposing. What I am proposing is a noun clause used as the object of a preposition of. A noun clause may also begin with an indefinite relative pronoun. Those are that, what, whatever, who, which, whoever, whichever. Unlike most relative pronouns, an indefinite relative pronoun does not have an antecedent in its sentence. So unlike most relative pronouns, an indefinite relative pronoun does not have an antecedent in the sentence, meaning it doesn't have to have any particular thing to ground it. He gave me whatever I wanted. It doesn't have to specifically tell you what they're talking about. What did he want? Whatever. Whatever I wanted. That is an indefinite relative pronoun. Whatever. He gave me whatever I wanted. A noun clause may also begin with an indefinite relative adjective. Whose, which, whatever. Or an indefinite relative adverb. Where, when, how, etc. I know whose car this is. I know where she went. Whose and where are indefinite relative adjectives. Adjective and noun clauses are sometimes used without an introductory word. meaning nothing introduces that particular statement, that clause. For example, I am Pei is an architect whom most critics praise. Okay? In this particular example, whom is an adjective but here in the second example, taking the word whom out shows you that the sentence doesn't technically need it. Doesn't technically need the adjective as seen previously. I am Pei is an architect most critics praise. It doesn't change the meaning. It simply removes a word, makes it a little bit tighter, a little less cluttered. And so you can understand from previous examples that adjectives and noun clauses are sometimes used without an introductory word. Most critics praise, that is an adjective clause. Most critics praise is still an adjective clause. But we do not have an adjective to introduce that I am Pei as an architect to most critics praise. In the second sentence, you just have to go directly into it. Next class, we will finish the discussion on the clause with part 2.